Good afternoon, everybody. We'd like to take you on a visual journey today through the magical islands to some of the amazing places in Indonesia where I lived for so long.
And on this journey together, we'll explore some of the mysteries of Gunung Padang and begin to see how Gunung Padang and other sites such as Göbekli Tepe in southern Turkey are rewriting the story of humanity's prehistory. Gunung Padang was rediscovered in 2011 by Indonesian geologist Dr. Danny Hilman Natawijaya. Danny will be our tour guide on this journey as he knows more about the Gunung Padang pyramid than anyone else alive. The surface ruins of Gunung Padang had been investigated a couple of times over the last century by Dutch and Australian archaeologists. But three things. They thought it was not much more than 2,000 years old, and they didn't recognize that the whole top of the mountain was an artificial construction. And they certainly didn't realize that there were deeper layers under the surface that were much more interesting than the ruins on the surface.
I'd like to introduce our main archaeological hero. Many of you will be familiar with Graham Hancock, who is one of the world's best-known alternative history researchers and has probably done more to uncover this alternative side of history than anyone else. And he's also written lots of books that have been translated in, I think, 23 languages. And then next to him we have Dr. Robert Schoch, who's the geologist. He's American, that is famous for redating the age of the Sphinx to 12,000 years old. And then following him, we have Hugh Newman, who is on tonight here at Nexus, and Andrew Collins. And together they created the Megalithomania conference in Glastonbury every year, and they're researchers as well, alternative historians. And finally, we have Sam Osmanovic, and he's the one who discovered the Bosnian pyramids.
And all of these high-powered guys have been to Gunung Padang and were very impressed. They all agreed that the top of the mountain is indeed an ancient stepped pyramid. So Gunung Padang was constructed over the top of the natural mountain in multiple phases over many thousands of years. The oldest levels have produced carbon-14 datings between 13,000 and 28,000 years old.
So now I would like to introduce this timeline to you. We'll come back to it later in further detail. But if we just start on the far right of the graph here, you can see we're talking about 30,000 years. And just to get the scale, the age of the place we're going to talk about, you can see that Plato and the whole of the ancient Greeks were here at 2,500 years ago, followed by the Egyptian pyramids, which are dated at 3,500, and then Sumeria, which is really as far back as we go with our modern history at 6,000 years. So then we make this huge leap to the newly discovered Göbekli Tepe in southern Turkey, which is dated at 12,500 years and has been agreed by the standard archaeological societies to be true. So they've got that far. But then we're going to try and make this huge leap again, because the place we're talking about, Gunung Padang in Java, is at its latest carbon dating. It's rated at 13,500 years. But some of the carbon dating go as far back, the earliest go back to 28,000 years old. If you just look at what we know in our lives, we talk about the last 2,000 years generally. Well, we're going 14 times longer than our normal thought process. So it's a long time.
Göbekli Tepe is a huge temple complex dated by the prestigious German Archaeological Society at 12,600 years before present.
Yeah, so really it's like a game-changing realization, this. It means that not only did they have societies large enough to be organized to create, this is 50 temples in southern Turkey here in Göbekli Tepe. Not only could they build them, but they had the society organized enough to feed them, accommodate them. It was obviously quite sophisticated.
So the textbooks are in need of urgent revision because of discoveries like Gunung Padang and Göbekli Tepe. But also, due to the vast quantity and stunning quality of the superb stonework around the world, as Duncan was saying. Not easily reproduced today using our most advanced technologies.
So this big one on the bottom here is a stone that's in Baalbek, which is now in present-day Lebanon, and it's over 1,300 tons in weight. It's just in the quarry still. The actual place where they were presumably going is this place here, where you can see 3 huge ones of them together. And then the Romans came along after and built what they call the Jupiter Temple on top of it, which is made with much smaller stones. So as we get closer to the present date, the stones get smaller and smaller, you know. And so then we get to Peru up there, and this is called the 12-sided stone. It's in Cusco, and 12-angle stone. You know, we can't do that today. There's no mortar. You can't put a piece of paper in between it. And then there's another one just after it, which is called the 12-sided stone. And again, if you put people next to these stones, they just come up quarter of the way. They're enormous stones. And then on the right, many of you will be familiar with Chichen Itza in Mexico. And this was so cleverly designed, so amazingly aligned, that on the 2 solstices, you get the illusion of a serpent, the shadow of a serpent, actually moving down the stones towards the head of the serpent, which is there at the bottom of the steps. We can't do that today. And finally, of course, we just have to mention the Great Pyramid, only because it's the most amazing one, and we're almost the most familiar with it.
And this phenomena of alignment with the cardinal directions of the Earth and alignment with the solstices and equinox is a global phenomena found in megalithic sites all around the world. So this new story has been woven over the last decades by 3 things in particular. Firstly, the ongoing archaeological research around the world. Secondly, the new technologies that Duncan was mentioning, the satellite scanning, and also portable scanners and so on, which show you what's underneath the ground. And thirdly, the work of the independent researchers we mentioned, decades of dedication by these guys to uncover the real truth of our past.
So we're going to mention many times in the course of this presentation that there's so much evidence towards there being a globe-spanning civilization before our own, maybe even much wiser than our own, as Duncan said, that was probably destroyed by the huge sea rises that happened of 400 feet or 125 meters that occurred at the end of the last great ice age.
So many of us here at the Nexus conference would probably agree that the greatest megalithic complexes and the greatest pyramids of the world were created before that time of the Great Flood 11,600 years ago. Also, the story of the sinking of Atlantis that our culture has could be a memory of this time that we know geologically was a worldwide sea level rise. But the idea of a pre-flood civilization is still a totally radical concept to the academic mainstream.
However, they can't deny that the amount of coastal land that was lost, that's very clear. And so really we can look at Indonesia, because that's probably one of the areas, as we'll show you, that lost more land than almost anywhere else, or an area that was civilized and cultivated. And that's the Southeast Asian continent of Sundaland. So this is a very important part of the world, particularly over the last 20,000 years. And you can see where the green area of this map is, that was all land previously. So we're familiar with Australia, and notice how in Australia you will have been able to walk to Papua New Guinea, that time ago. And also the huge area that is called Sundaland, that includes Sumatra, Java, Bali, all the islands going east to Timor, but also Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, some of Cambodia, Vietnam, maybe Laos. So it was an enormous area that was spanned.
And you can also see that there was a huge inland lake there and 4 mighty river systems. This was the fertile crescent of its age. So we hope by the end of this presentation you'll all agree that Gunung Padang is almost certainly the remains of an antediluvian civilization. In its unexplored underground chambers, we may find the secrets of humanity's past. It may even hold the key to creating a sustainable future by avoiding the mistakes of previous cycles. So let's zoom down in space and back in time to have a look at this mysterious pyramid.
So here you are. This is an artist's impression of it. In the local language, which is Sundanese, not Indonesian, it was called the Mountain of Light. But sometimes they also refer to it as the Mountain of Enlightenment. So that's one reason I was really attracted to it.
Now this is an artist's impression. It's not exactly accurate, but it is the first image I ever saw of Gunung Padang on the net. And it's obviously a bit influenced by Mayan pyramid designs. It does have some similarity though. Here's another artist's impression that's a bit closer to the way it is now. But I made my own very rough drawing also that corrects a few details, such as it has a curved northern front, which you can see. It's on top of a small mountain and it's surrounded by other hills and jungle. So in early 2015, we heard rumours that there had been a new pyramid discovered in Java. Wow.
That's not far away.
I remember saying to Pratima, maybe we could go there. Maybe we could meet the guy who discovered it. Maybe we could interview him. Maybe we could write an article and maybe Duncan would print it in Nexus.
Maybe.
And all of that happened in the last year. So after months of arranging things by email, we finally made it to the office of Dr. Danny Hillman Natawijaya in Bandung University.
And we were immediately struck by not only what an efficient and precise scientist he was, but what a deeply spiritual man he was as well. He had a really lovely way about it. He's a family man with 3 kids. So his credentials are also very impressive. He got his
Master of Science.
Master of Science at Auckland University, and then he went on to California and got his PhD at Caltech, California Institute of Technology. He's also regarded as one of the top dozen academics in the whole of Indonesia.
So we interviewed him for 2 hours asking many pages of questions, and when we thought we'd finished, he gave us another 2-hour presentation of the scientific data that he'd collected over the last years and how he sees Gunung Padang fitting into the global picture of humanity's true history. It was watching his presentation that we first became aware that you can't begin to understand Gunung Padang except in the context of Sundaland.
So now we're just going to take you on a little tour, our journey to get there, which basically was along these traffic-jammed roads going through Indonesia, bottlenecked all the way, until finally we could turn off onto a tiny little broken road with potholes and just about room for 2 cars to pass, and go through these verdant tea plantations that was very beautiful. And watch the ladies all collecting their, laughing and giggling in the way they do, and putting their leaves in the pink bags so the factory down the road knew it was from their village. And you can see their houses are quite small, but they were all very well kept and tidy. And then finally we got up. This is now going up to the last village it's actually halfway up the mountain of Gunung Padang, this village you can see there.
And zooming in, you can see the white, can you point to this?
Yeah.
The white roof tourist building down at the bottom of the stairs and some cars in the car park. And there's a little freshwater spring at the bottom of the stairs with a metal cup on a chain for those who are game to drink the local water.
So it was a steep climb. It was 400 steps, which I hadn't been looking forward to, but Danny was very gracious and went slowly for us. So it was a gorgeous sunny day, and so it was actually fine. And
Danny had a few friends with him, and we had a few friends with us.
Yeah, so it was a little adventure for the occasion.
So I'm going to try and give you a feel for the layout of Gunung Padang. First we'll get our orientation right. Here's the directions of the pyramid, and then I'll show you the actual shape of the pyramid, make it a bit clearer here. There, now you can see how it is a bit like a Mayan stepped pyramid.
But it goes all the way down the mountain.
And
like
if
that.
we
It's
zoom
just
in a
top.
bit closer here, we can see the various terraces. Here on the right-hand side, we have terrace 1 is the larger area at the bottom. Then we have this diagonal wall between terrace 1 and the higher terraces 2, 3, 4 and 5. And then on terrace 1 we have a couple of interesting surface shapes. We have a special little mound here which is considered particularly sacred, and a rectangle right next to it here.
The whole top of the mountain that we can see there is just 150 meters long. At the front it's 40 meters wide, and at the back it's 20 meters wide. So it's 6,000 square meters in all.
And Danny jokes that the whole shape looks a bit like the Starship Enterprise in Star Trek. It's got a lower rounded section at the front and upper straight section at the back, and looks something like this. So, in which case the engine room down the bottom must be the hidden chamber, which we haven't got into yet, but we'll come to it in a moment. And this is looking down on it again. You can see the rounded front of the pyramid.
It's also in the dry season. So this is sunrise on the top of the mountain, and we just felt really deeply moved when we were there. You could feel this intensity, this spiritual feeling there that a lot of people had. The locals still go there constantly for ceremonies, but they of course hadn't realized how old it was. They took it for granted.
And you can also see here the alignment with the great volcano to the north. The one in the distance there is Gunung Gedi. And there's also a smaller hill in between the two of them, and they look almost the same size and roughly similar shape. And as a sacred geometer, I'm very aware that this means you're in a relationship on the surface of the earth to the geometry of the earth. And many power spots on the earth have this. It's a fractal power spot of the earth.
If you notice beneath the lady on the right, click, there is,
Oh, no.
yes, so there's this little area just down there. And there was a Qigong master who'd come from Bogor with his student, which is quite a long way to bring him to soak up into one of his more advanced students.
And Pratima was so inspired by watching them that she started doing her own energy practice on the little sacred mound next to them. And of course they tuned into that, and she ended up good friends with them and doing Qigong with them. They ended up doing healing sessions on everyone in our group.
Yes. So, and he was telling us exactly where the most energized spots were, and this was one of them. This is called the throne, and here's Narada sitting there feeling the energy of it. And then this is Danny and Sam Osmanovic, who discovered the Bosnian pyramid. Also there, standing in a particular area, feeling the energy of the rocks.
They've done a geomagnetic survey of the site which showed 3 different areas where there are strange magnetic anomalies, and people have reported that their GPSs go crazy and their compass needles just start spinning.
Like this, they just don't stop. This is the rectangular room seen from the door. In the very far left-hand corner, you can see what they call the altar. Of course, no one has any idea really what it was used for, but it felt quite high energy. And just next to it, they have what they call the rock gamelan. And any of you familiar with Michael Tellinger's work, where he has ringing stones that he beats and they make a sound? Well, they have a whole gamelan, a whole orchestra of them. When all the workers are going up, you know, in their lunchtime, they'll all get on the different rocks, and they can get a whole orchestra going by different sounds on the actual rocks.
But everything we're seeing here on the surface level is probably no more than 2,000 to 3,000 years old, which is nothing compared to what's on the deeper levels. And in the back of that picture, you could see a thing saying exposed second layer. And on this picture, whoops, here we go. On this picture, you can actually see that this wall here is more sophisticated and intact than most of the other walls on the site. And Danny says that that's actually the second layer of building, not the surface layer, and that the stonework in it is therefore more superior as it gets older.
Okay, so this is the steep eastern side of the terrace, and we're just seeing the butt end of these wonderful andesite plinths. Most of them are 1 or even 2 meters long, extending into the mountain. So we're just seeing the edge. So imagine the handiwork required to actually lay thousands and thousands. This is the whole side well, the whole top part, but you can see it on the front there and on the sides of the mountain. Yes, so normally they do occur in nature normally, but they're always vertical. You may be familiar with the Giant's Causeway in the north of Ireland, where they're all standing vertically. So, and also the rocks don't come from this area. There's no quarry within 50 kilometers that has rocks like this. So they were all brought in and laid down, and this whole beautiful mountain of...
And often they have that six-sided nature like this because of the way they fracture as the magma cools. It naturally fractures in this hexagonal pattern. And many of the plinths at Gunung Padang have really strange markings and indentations on them. We'll show you some of them. And a single plinth can weigh up to 300 kilograms. This is what it looked like about 50 years ago before they cleared the jungle back from the top of the hill. However, Gunung Padang everything changed there radically in 2012 when the Indonesian president came to visit the site.
So here he is, this is Danny, our hero, in red, showing him some maps of it, and the Indonesian president in black with his wife behind. And there was the Jakarta Post said that he was convinced that the Gunung Padang megalithic site was the world's oldest prehistoric monument. And he wrote on his Twitter account that the megalithic structure was in fact older than the pyramids of Giza in Egypt. So in doing that, he actually appointed Danny to be the head of a team of geologists and archaeologists to do further research.
It looked like everything was set to do some wonderful research there. And once the president had visited, we also had the military come and visit, which was sort of good in a way because the soldiers did a lot of the manual work of doing some of the excavations and so on.
And they also had the helicopter, which meant that they could fly in sometimes, fly in heavy equipment.
This dude here is the head of the armed forces of Indonesia.
And then this was the Minister of Culture. You can tell because he's got the batik hat with the ikat shirt. And he said, okay, we're going to donate, we're going to allow you 300 million, which is about 310,000 Aussie dollars
300 billion rupee.
To carry on with your research. Unfortunately, up until today, that money has still not come through.
Because the government was changed at the 2014 elections.
Yeah. So in the new president came in, and also we heard there was a bit of academic resistance from other people saying, you know, there can't possibly be, you know, we're not even going to visit there, other archaeologists, because it's impossible for there to be anything that old.
And there's a lot of competition for funding. And obviously not everybody can fit Gunung Padang into their worldview and believes that it could possibly be that old. So there's definitely a lot of politics going on in the background.
However, there is a lot of, there's probably more international interest in a way than there is in the Indonesian academic world. So more and more research is taking place.
And we're really hoping that international interest in Gunung Padang will help to get things moving again. So Danny and his team have hosted various groups of people at the site. I think this is the Indonesian Association of Young Geologists, and this is the Indonesian Association of Geophysicists. The gentleman in the orange t-shirt is Dr. Andang Bachiar, who's also a geologist and part of the team, the research team at Gunung Padang. And in the background you can see some little fairies with white hats on.
The little Muslim girls. A lot of school kids get taken there from the local schools. So Ooh. So Dr. Andang and Danny said that the new geoarchaeological findings could potentially update the whole history of mankind. They're aware that this Indonesian civilization could really fill in a few of the gaps.
And that the government must open its mind. This is a scientific world. They could at least begin by opening a public discussion about these findings.
So this is now on Terrace 5, and we're looking down the terraces. We're at the top of the mountain, in other words, looking down the terraces, and to at least 2 earlier layers beneath the surface ruins. So each thick layer is made of 1 meter or more of interwoven plinths, and it's stuck together with some sort of artificial mortar, some sort of man-made mortar, and separated. Each layer is separated by another layer of loose soil and dirt.
So first they built a layer of plinths, and then thousands of years later, we're not sure of the exact timing of this, they buried the whole thing under 1 to 7 meters of soil. It didn't happen naturally, it was put there. And then they made another layer of plinths, and they did this multiple times over perhaps the last 28,000 years. It's really quite a unique history to this place. So we're going to show you some of the excavations that have been done.
So there were 12 sites that were manually dug out in 2014, just after the President's visit, but covered over again. They have to cover over all the things they dig out because it is a sacred site now, and so that they leave the mountain as they found it all the time, not full of holes. But you can see on this site here how these plinths go into the ground. We're just seeing the surface of them, really. And you can also see how tightly packed the plinths are together as you go down.
And the mortar in between them, when there is mortar, they call it a geopolymer cement, similar to the Bosnian pyramid. It's a very effective glue between the blocks, made up of a strange combination of silica and iron and clay. It makes it very hard for them to dig down through the layers, especially the second layer of plinths is very hard to get through. The top layer of plinths, or the top layer of the pyramid, being only maybe 3,000 years old, Danny actually wondered aloud to us whether the builders of the top layer actually knew what was underneath the surface. You're dealing with such vast expanses of time here.
And they must have known it was a sacred site, but did they really realize how many buildings, layers of buildings that were underneath?
After they complete each excavation, they then replace everything as neatly as they can, so as not to desecrate the sacred site.
So here we're going.
Here's some more pictures of side excavations. You can see how steep the sides get here. And his soldiers helping with the excavations. Now there's a really steep section. You can see the markings they make in order to document where everything is and replace things properly.
So they literally label, not on the rock, but on the maps they draw each rock and in which square it was. You get an idea of the scale there from the mobile phone or whatever it is there. But you can see how deep these stonework is going. The whole top of the mountain may be like that, really. So this is another important member of the team. His name's Ali Akbar, good Indonesian name. And he's an archaeologist at the University of Indonesia. And he wrote a book called Gunung, Padang, Site, Mystery and Archaeology.
And as we touched on before, it's really important to have an archaeologist on the team because there's this rivalry between archaeologists and geologists these days. The geologists keep making new discoveries using their new tools about the Earth and the age of the Earth and the age of these monuments. And often they trespass on the province of the archaeologists, whose job it is to talk about the history of humanity. And there's a bit of a clash going on here. So it's great to have an archaeologist on the team.
It's hard for the archaeologists to keep up, in a way, with the new technological discoveries.
It is indeed.
So here's an amazingly beautiful, magical thing that was actually dug out quite low down, 9 meters down in one of their
It's
holes.
called the Kujang stone. It's a very significant sacred item to the local people because a kujang is a ceremonial bladed weapon. It's the equivalent of the Bali kris knife, and it's the design you'll sometimes see on Danny's hat and jacket if you catch him in the future photos. This particular stone, though, is really remarkable. It's porous like pumice, but it's heavier than granite. Danny said he's never seen anything else like it.
Because here's a bit I couldn't remember before. So the andesite is 3.4 grams a cubic centimetre, but granite is less than 3.2. So this kujang is actually probably more we can relate to it like a Harry Potter wand. It's not an instrument to kill or anything. It's like this picture shows. It's actually a magical wand, and it seems to be engraved in the rock here. Though we're not sure.
Here's some more markings that you find just walking around the place. This is a photo I took of what looks like fingers scraping through stone. And then we have...
Danny said they couldn't possibly have happened through erosion because a lot of these strange markings were actually underneath the stone where
it's definitely not water erosion.
Yeah, so
this is what they call a mangosteen, this circle with a dimple in it, and possibly 10 or 20% of the plinths have strange marks like that in them. This is one we call the tiger's paw.
Well, they call it the tiger's paw, and we copy them. So now we're about to go down this hole, and this actually goes 11 meters. It's the deepest test pit they did. You can see the army guys were pretty helpful there. And they're lowering Dr. Batjar into it.
What did they find down there?
This particular pit was, they tried to make many pits that went deeply in, but they couldn't because they got to the second and the third layer of the plinths. But this particular place, they found there weren't plinths underneath, so they could get this deep.
And down there at the bottom, they discovered something rather interesting. This stone that you can see at the bottom here, they accidentally broke open a stone sphere, and inside it there was another stone, and they could move the internal stone. So they thought, well, this is very interesting, we'll bring it up to the surface. So they put it in a bag, and they brought it to the surface, and they took it out of the bag. When they got it out of the bag, it looked like this. It was a stone sphere again. Now
wasn't broken anymore.
This is Indonesia, where magic is part of the culture still. And so they thought this was a bit strange, but things like this happen in Indonesia. So they did decide that they would try to break it open again to see whether there was a stone inside it that you could move around.
Freely moving.
But they struck it with some sort of pick, and the caretaker of Gunung Padang site, who's paid to look after the place, came running up holding his head saying, when you hit that rock, it's like you're hitting my head, please stop.
Stop. Yeah.
So, okay, that was enough for them. They decided they'd put it back where it was at the bottom and write that off as one of the strangest things that's happened at Gunung Padang. That's called the Rolling Stone.
And Narity went clambering down, kind of down the slope behind these trees here, and it was a bit steep for me, so I just watched from the top.
It was pretty full on, but it was worth it because I didn't realize where we were. We were pretty close to where the huge hidden chamber is. And when you're down the steep slope, you can sort of see the layers of plinth sticking out from the side.
So one of the most amazing things about Gunung Padang, and maybe why, in fact, it became such a spiritual site, is because there's this huge chamber underneath. Now, we've only seen this through ground-penetrating radar. We haven't actually been able to go down into it yet. But it's huge. It's 9 meters across by 10 meters the other way, and it's about 5 meters high. So if you think of it in terms of your house, it's about the size of a small house.
It may have begun as a natural cave, but it may also have been modified after that. It may be the reason Gunung Padang was built here in the first place. And it's probably been sealed since the first layer was buried.
And then here you have these two walls of some sort. Danny wondered if it was some sort of ventilation shaft. It's about 1 meter in between the two walls. So, and also it could well be that this looks like a bit of a corridor, which maybe was the original entrance or exit. But it starts quite deep down, and as I said before, it's really hard for them to penetrate down because of the plinths.
So the next phase of research, logically, would be to try and get a small robotic camera down into that chamber, either by finding a way in or by making a way in for it.
And Danny says, you know, will it be a bit like the Hall of Records underneath the right paw of the Sphinx? Will we find not only physical things, but also some sort of spiritual inspiration in some way?
So we're going to go through a little tour of the scientific investigations now to give you some of the evidence for how we know that that chamber's there and how we know how old this place is and so on. I want to introduce you again to one of our archaeological heroes, Dr. Robert Schock. I'm getting a click. Okay.
So he's actually at the University of Boston these days, but he is very well regarded. He got his PhD in geology and geophysics at Yale. He's got a Master of Science and a Master of Philosophy in geology and geophysics. He's degrees in anthropology and geology from George Washington University. So he's one of the most highly academic alternative historians that we have. Thank goodness for him.
And he was at Gunung Padang at the same time as Graham Hancock, one of our favourite authors. I'm sure many of you have read his books as well. There they are discussing scans together.
As a geologist, Dr. Schock could really understand Danny's subsurface scans and other geological evidence. So let's hear him speak a little bit himself for a couple of minutes about his experience at Gunung Padang.
I am talking there with Dr. Danny Hillman Natawijaja. It's not just the surface features that we have at Gunung Padang, but he has been able to probe down about 15, 20 or more meters in depth. And he and his team have done this a number of different ways. They've used electrical resistivity, which people may or may not be familiar with. It's something I've certainly worked with as a geologist. He's used ground penetrating radar, which many people are familiar with. It's a popular way to study below surface structures nowadays. He's used seismic, as I have used around the Great Sphinx in Egypt, to model what is underneath Gunung Padang. And he's actually had the opportunity with his group to drill. So he's drilled boreholes down into the structure, received permission to do that. So he has a lot of subsurface data. And in the boreholes that he took, he brought up samples of the rock and the sediment. And in some of those boreholes, he found artificial cements, he believes, which are very sophisticated for such an ancient structure. And he also found material that has carbon in it, which could be used for radiocarbon dating. And it's this radiocarbon dating that has really allowed him to get a handle on exactly how old the structure is.
Thought it was important to have validation by a genuine professor at a university saying, this is real. So here you can see the large chamber on one of the scans.
You know, that chamber might have been sealed thousands of years ago. That's a good one because this is a good picture really, because you can see the different terraces as they go up and how far beneath. So they're just not managed yet to get those. They need more the funds to actually come in to be able to go further. So they're a bit stuck at the moment. We're all hanging in limbo. This is another type of technology, electrical resistivity, and that also shows the chamber from another angle.
Having these multiple different types of scans, they sort of validate each other, especially that you can see the large chamber on all the different scanning technologies.
And this also shows the aquifer and the reservoir of water that is underneath and around. It seems like all of the Great Pyramids, certainly Giza and Bosnia, have these aquifers or water underneath. And we wonder if that is because of that actually they're energy generating pyramids in some way, and they need the water there to be able to do that.
So, we're going to go on a journey through this land of 400 volcanoes and 18,000 lush green scattered islands. What were the builders of Gunung Padang really like? Let's visit some of the ancient cultures around Indonesia that still exist to see if there are any clues for us about what these people who built this place might have been like. Some of these cultures are still hunter-gatherers living pretty much in what we call the Stone Age, which shows that it's possible for these animistic, shamanistic cultures to coexist with high technological civilizations.
So
Pratima's going to be our guide as she speaks the language fluently, having lived in Bali for 29 years.
Yeah, so it was really, I came from such a small nuclear family in England that, and then I was fortunate to get to some of the poorest areas of Sierra Leone on a volunteer service for a year, and I realized then just how incredibly happy those African people were. They had so little, and yet they'd walk down the street like they were dancing, and they'd sing, and they'd laughed a lot, and they were just so happy. And I was really deeply touched by how, in a way, what we call a more primitive society was in fact more happy. And so it drew me to travel a lot around the world and end up eventually in Bali, where I ended up with employing 300 people that became like this huge extended family for me, with all the weddings and funerals and ceremonies to go to. If you've been to Bali, it's full of ceremonies all the time. So I had this huge extended family, and it really fulfilled that part of me that was so just missed out in a way in just a tiny little nuclear family.
I think we're all missing that tribal connection.
And so it also gave me an opportunity to visit some of the amazing megalithic cultures that are around Indonesia still today. So we're living in our technically hip society, but meanwhile they're still living back in like the Stone Age. So I just found that very fascinating. So we're going to begin this little journey to a few of the places around Indonesia with the island of Sulawesi, which is in orange here. And it's interesting because if you can remember previously, we had the maps of Sundaland and then Sahul in Australia, but Sulawesi was in neither of them. So it somehow it may be why it held its traditions longer. So
when Graham Hancock went to visit Danny in Gunung Padang, Danny took him to Sulawesi to see these megaliths that we're about to see ourselves.
Yeah. So we're going about here to the Bada Valley, and in this Bada Valley are these huge stone monoliths scattered around. The people have no idea, what they're for, or they've just been there as long as any of their ancestors can remember. And we can't date them either. We can't do carbon dating underneath because sometimes they've been moved a bit, so we couldn't take a bit of soil from underneath and go, okay, this is the date. So we've no idea about them, really. Yeah. So this bottom right one looks a bit bisexual, really. I don't know if you can see closely enough, but seems to have both male and female parts. And then these urns are interesting. They're in Sulawesi. They're actually in another different valley, but they've no idea what they're for. But they were reminiscent for me. The only time I've ever seen an urn or a vat like that is this one in the bottom right-hand corner. And many of these are scattered around the pyramids of Giza. You may have seen them and you see photos of the pyramids. And there, again, they have no idea what they were for, but I would like to suggest that they are actually devices used for levitating the rocks up onto the sides of the pyramids. And I have to go into that in another talk, or come and ask us in the booth after if you like, because that's a great story. And then,
as you can see here, all these little statues are very similar, but the top right ones are Göbekli Tepe, which is many thousands of miles away from Gunung Padang, or from Sulawesi.
The three top right are are in Turkey.
And the bottom right one looks more like human beings than dogs, but it's remarkable how similar these little statues are over such a vast distance. Here again we have remarkably similar designs at far-flung corners of the earth. The locations of these are obviously Easter Island is the large one on the right there, but the two on the bottom are Göbekli Tepe, and the top left one is Sulawesi again. And they all have their hands in this distinctly symbolic pose. Coincidence theorists would no doubt say that this does not indicate a connection between these remote locations, but it's certainly another piece of evidence in favour of a common originating influence to these scattered cultures.
And actually this little man in the middle at the bottom there is called the Urfa man, and he's definitely dated at 11,000 years old. So he may be one of our oldest statues that we have. Okay, and now we move into, actually it was at the Griffith University quite recently in Australia that some researchers found in south-west Sulawesi, they found these handprints on the wall, the top left photo and the top right photo there. And it seems like hands are, oh yes, and so the Sulawesi hands were actually dated, were able to carbon date because the paint has carbon in it, at 40,000 years old. Whereas you may all be familiar with the Lascaux caves in France with the bulls, many of us have seen that, which were dated at only 33,000 years old, and they were saying they were the most primitive cave drawings that we have. There's probably a lot more in Australia that were more primitive. But the bottom left hands is interesting because it's actually in Spain, in southern Spain, but the Smithsonian University went there to do a survey, and they did algorithms to look at the size and shape of the hands, and they discovered that 75% of these hands are actually women's. So we always think, I don't know if you do, I always think of like cave drawings, oh, that's the men doing their cave drawings, but actually, of course, it's probably the women. So. Okay, and then we, just a little bit on Sulawesi, because it's death is as important as life there, and as if you may know from visiting Bali, the cremation ceremonies are much more important than weddings or births or any other. Death is the ultimate celebration. And this is in Sulawesi, in Tanah Toraja, and they make wooden effigies of their dead, and they put them up in the cliff there, and they put their clothes on them and try and make them as lifelike as they can, okay? And here you can see there's a new one gone in of their nanny with her best purple outfit on. And they actually carry the dead around. Once every 3 years, I took the photos out of it, but once every 3 years they actually take their nannies and their granddads out of the grave, put new clothes on them, comb their mouldy hair, and take them for a walk around their land, and then put them back in the grave again. And of course it's a family affair, all the kids join in. And so, you know, no one's afraid of death. That's just like, but I had like lots of photos of that, and people go, maybe not. So, so here's Sulawesi. These are the houses they live in. And the thing about Sulawesi, that why I'm mentioning it really, is because they all insist that they actually came from Pleiades, that the people are called, the word Toraja actually means the people from above, and their houses are shaped like this bow because they represent the ships that they came down to earth from Pleiades in. And here you can see just a village. This is the mum taking her two daughters to a funeral ceremony, of course, and they have their little toy knives, their kris blades on them, the little girls, so they're magical wands, they're Harry Potter wands. And this is the carved front of one of those Tanah Toraja houses, all intricately hand-carved and painted, absolutely glorious. And you can see there in the top left how beautiful Toraja is when you see the silhouette of one of these houses with these gorgeous ship roofs on it. Of course, Sulawesi, you're all probably familiar with the story of the boogie man coming to get you. Well, that's these guys in the sailing ships. It's actually the Bugis people, and they come from 8 hours south of the Tanah Toraja, the Makassar, and they are still they have the ships that are still the largest working boats on the planet today that are still going, that have wooden, what do you call them? Wooden rivets, that's the word. Have wooden rivets. And they are still pirates. If you have a yacht and you're sailing around that area of the earth, you need to watch out for those.
They've been pirates for many centuries.
They're still pirates. And some of my friends had a little yacht that ran ashore on a bit of sand somewhere. So they went to land to try and get help. And when they came back, the steering wheel and their rudder had gone, so they're still... So, and this is Sumatra. Again, they say the same thing. I mean, they're actually, they're probably 3,000 kilometers apart, but they also say that they came from Pleiades, and they look at Orion a lot, and they've got those two places in mind. And again, the houses, as you can see, are shaped like that. And this is just their cloth. You can see I wanted to include this one simply because the cloth they still make today in their tradition. All of their cloths have a giant at the front, all the people, and then how we have here 1, 2, 3, 4, a few of them are giants, and I only mentioned that because Hugh Newman is going to talk about giants later. But they all say that they did have giants. This is actually a beaded tapestry that the women who worked for me made. It took 25 of them 6 months to bead it. It's in the Regent Four Seasons. But we also included the necessary giant. Sumatra. Back to Sumatra, just because, just some statues from there. But they still have mystics. Actually, all the islands still have their mystics. These mystics are called datus. There's just a couple of them. They're modern day guys who heal the sick. They lead rituals. They contact the spirits of the dead. They predict auspicious days to have events. Yeah.
So they say Indonesia's a Muslim society, but you just scratch the surface and you find that there's still a very animistic tradition there.
And this is a little island near us off Sumatra. This is a photo top left from the 50s, but you can see how they did actually manage to carry the graves. Of course, they're gravestones they're carrying. And on the bottom, I counted like 46 people trying to get that rock up the hill. And they still have this great ceremony where once a year the young boys have their initiation of manhood. They have to jump over this 2.3 meter high rock. And nowadays it's easy, but in the old days they used to have sharpened bamboo stakes sticking up out of it. So if you didn't make it, you could get quite injured. And now we are, yes, I'll just bring you to a map of Indonesia because I'm not quite sure how familiar you all are of it. It's actually got 18,306 islands, according to the Indonesian census. However, the CIA reckon it's only 17,500 because they always get things wrong, don't they? So only half of those 18,000 are actually inhabited, and only 1,000, are named. Half of them are named, but only 1,000 of those 18,000 are actually permanently inhabited. So. And there's 400 volcanoes, as we said before, a quarter of which are active. And the whole length, west to east, is 5,000 kilometers. So now we're going to go east a little bit.
Before you do, I just wanted to point out what a wonderful dragon's tail this is to the end of Southeast Asia and Sundaland, and what an amazing plain this must have been between the volcanic peaks when the sea level was lower.
Here's Bali, where any been to Bali? There we are. And Lombok,
That woke
Sumbawa.
us up.
Yeah. And Flores. And now we're just going to go to Sumba. And of course, Australia is only just about 90k south of Roti. So, when the sea was higher, it must have been really easy just to row there. So here's Sumba, which is really astonishing. If you ever get to Bali, go to Sumba because they have, it really is like going back in the Stone Age. It's totally so ancient feeling, and these are all their gravestones. And if you can go there, go, next slide, on to the Pasola, which happens once a year, which is when they all get on bare horseback and 2 different teams, and then they fight like crazy. And again, in the old days, they used to have really sharp and razor-sharp spears, and they had to shed blood to get the harvest, to guarantee that the harvest would work. But these days, they're supposed to have quite blunt bamboo, but still they need a little blood to come out. And it's fascinating to go there.
So now
Oh yes, no, I forgot also just one tiny last thing. The way that they know when to start the Pasola horse battle is because the three mystics go and they sit on the edge of the cliff for days, and they wait until they see thousands and thousands of worms mating. And when that happens, then they know it's time for the Pasola.
So magic is definitely alive there. This is an amazing, huge cathedral-like cave on Flores. And in 2003, an Australian team of archaeologists discovered a new branch of humanity that hadn't been known before, which was immediately nicknamed the Hobbit, because the adult figure that they found was 1 meter tall. And they could tell by the teeth and by the lines on the skull or something that it was indeed an adult that tall. And it changed the theory of evolution, because we thought that all the other branches of humanity had died out long before 12,000 years ago. Made us realize that only 12,000 years ago, humans as in Homo sapiens sapiens, were still living contemporaneously with other branches of the human tree. Yeah. Neanderthals, for instance, went extinct about 30,000 years ago.
So they found one fully intact skeleton, and of course they knew it was she because of the pelvis, and they also knew from the leg bones that it stood upright, that she stood upright like we do. And basically, small body, small brain. You can see here she's lost her bottom tooth, and she was basically dated at 18,000 years old. And they say that they survived right up until about 12,000 years ago. That's controversial, but it could be that they were alive. There's actually some records of the Portuguese sailors arriving there because in the 1500s, and saying that still there were little people there.
And apparently at that time they also had other strange things on Flores, like dwarf elephants and giant monitor lizards and huge birds.
And I don't know if you are familiar, but so this, in Australia there are different types of original people here. There's what they call the robust Aborigines, but there's also what they call the little Aborigines. And apparently they were last seen in just 1937, just west of Cairns. And they were regarded, amongst the other Aborigine groups, as being the most spiritual and the most mystic of them all. And apparently in 1937, they sort of said, okay, enough of this white man stuff, we're going west. And they went west, but we met an original man.
Just recently, who told us that, yes, the little people are still there. And not only that, but that a lot of the children in the schools and so on are much smaller than
yeah, when they
average.
do statistics on the height of the kids, that just that particular area where there are a lot of Aborigine kids, that the average height is much smaller than. So.
And lastly, on our tour of Indonesian mystery sites, this is actually a little further east than Indonesia, but worth mentioning because Nan Madol, which has 92 man-made islands on the coral reef, is also made out of andesite plinths, as Gunung Padang is. And it's also thought by the locals to be actually a later copy of a site that's further out to sea and under the ocean. After the ocean rose, they rebuilt it again further up on the coral reef.
And they do stack rather nicely, these andesite plinths, because they're hexagonal, did you?
Mm-hmm. I've seen that before.
Yeah, and so it's rather like Venice, maybe, where, you know, the streets were actually water. And they also say that there's an underground chamber there too, so whether it's underwater or what, I don't know, but they've no idea how old.
There was
how
an
old it
article
is.
on Nan Madol in a recent Nexus too, about a year ago, I think.
Hardly anyone's ever been there, probably.
So returning to Gunung Padang again, I think the biggest question mark over the site is why bury it multiple times under tons and tons and tons of soil and then remake it again? It was done at least twice, and this means carrying all that soil to the top of the mountain. To our logic, it's mind-boggling. Why on earth would anyone do that?
So it's the same actually in two places, in Göbekli Tepe in Turkey and also in Bosnia, where in Göbekli Tepe they discovered that, yes, it had all been purposely covered over. In fact, the hill was called the Potbelly Hill when they first discovered it. So they must have had thousands of people in there like shoveling up earth to cover it over. So why did they do that? Did they do it perhaps because they knew there were marauding tribes coming in and they were going to, they needed to protect what they had there? Or were they maybe trying to save it for posterity in some way, like protect it so that, maybe they had, I have a feeling that they had a lot more spiritual wisdom and were a lot more in tune than we are today. And so maybe they could actually see in some way that in the future a wiser culture would come where we wouldn't go in and just destroy it like so saying the Taliban destroyed all the beautiful Buddhas in Afghanistan, but that generally speaking we wouldn't be destroying these old beautiful sites. So maybe they were buried for that reason. We have no idea. And the same thing is true of the Bosnian pyramids, where they've discovered kilometers of tunnels that go from the town and presumably end up underneath the pyramid in some way that have all been man-made, filled in. So he's got all his team from 44 countries, he says he's got volunteers coming to actually work to uncover the top of the pyramid and also to take out
dig out the fill.
Dig out the fill from these tunnels, and it's really easy to do. So, and the rest of the tunnels stay totally open. So
Pratima's going to the Bosnian pyramids in October.
I'm going there
with
my teacher Nassim Haramin. So that would be very interesting because he's actually the one who really turned me on to getting into this ancient history, this alternative history. So it's really exciting.
So I think you probably all heard a quote from Arthur C. Clarke about magic, that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. I like to keep that in mind when you're looking at these very magical places in Indonesia.
So this is interesting really because you can see what the planet Earth looked like. How far back are we? Between 110,000 and 12,000 before present, and how much of the Earth actually was covered in ice, including our little corner of Australia, which looks like we were pretty much under ice here too.
And you're talking maybe a kilometre or two of glaciers on top of the land.
And
note that Australia's connected to New Guinea again.
And notice, and here where you can really see how it was just probably a quick row over to
90 kilometres or so.
Yeah, to Indonesia from the northwest tip, from Darwin really, isn't it?
We're going to take a quick journey to Sahul because the history of these two land masses is so entwined over the last thousands of years. This is a map from Monash University recently. It shows 21 tribes around Australia that remember or that have a oral history memory of when the land went out much further than it does now.
So notice how the Gulf of Carpentaria was so much bigger and how the north here went so much further north, and also how Tasmania was joined to the rest of the Australian continent there. So, and we also, this Aborigine man that we met recently said that his mob actually remember when the coast was much further out, when they could walk.
When they could walk to New Guinea, yeah.
Yeah.
We want to recommend a book which is getting very popular at the moment called Dark Emu by Bruce Pascoe, which really documents how sophisticated the Australian Aboriginal Peoples Society was in Australia, that they weren't hunter-gatherers. They had it all set up beautifully with, to feed gatherings of 30,000 people and to live in relative harmony with their environment for at least 70,000 years, perhaps far longer than that.
So this idea that we have of terra nullius, that the English gave so that they could conquer and take over, that there was no one really significant here, is really a great read. I really highly recommend it. It's amazing. Fields of crops growing. And then another author that just come out recently, Stephen and Evan Strong. We also love these books if you like to get them on Amazon. The first one's called Shun, the Hidden History of the Original Australians. And in it, they're saying that if any of you been to Gosford, the Gosford hieroglyphs? Oh, so many. So they're speaking about that, and of course, a couple of experts came recently, Egyptian scholars came and translated the Gosford glyphs and said that many of the words in there are actually from a middle type of Egyptian hieroglyph that was not commonly known. Some words have just only been discovered recently. So all those theories about some ex-army guys who had a bit of time on their hands couldn't possibly be true. So in other words, the Egyptians did come to Australia. Did they come to learn the wisdom from the Aborigines because they were so spiritually minded and lived in so much harmony? That's a great book.
The Strongs have a list of 21 sites around Australia which are dated between 70,000 and 185,000 years old, sites of habitation. And if a single one of these is accepted by the academic mainstream, that will mean that they have to totally rewrite or reassess the out of Africa theory, which says that we are all descended from peoples who left Africa 70,000 years ago, roughly.
So I'm sure they're right. I mean, just being with Aborigine people, looking at them, they just look like they're so much more ancient. And so I think it's really out of Australia, not out of Africa.
So before we leave Sahul, we also have to mention this important site located on the north coast of New South Wales. This is an artist's reconstruction of it, of course. This could be possibly much earlier than Stonehenge. It could be one of the earliest megalithic structures on Earth.
So it's called the Standing Stones, and there are many sites, this is just one of many, that are scattered around a 40-kilometre radius around Mullumbimby, where we live. Unfortunately, they're not yet sort of revealing the location. One, because it's a very spiritual place for the original people who are going there, and also because it's on private land. But unfortunately, the landowner who had it in the 40s when Slater, the head of the Archaeological Society in Australia, found it first, they actually bulldozed the area because the government was coming in and threatening to take their land away from them, and they were like, no. And so the old guy just got his son to bulldoze a lot. So all down at the bottom of the hill, there's hundreds of rocks, some with little bits of carving and stuff. But it looks like the really main rocks, the really big rocks, some of them have been taken. So we hope that they're in safe hands somewhere around that area. And that when the day comes that that area is free for us to go and visit, that maybe those people would bring them back. Wishful thinking, maybe?
So what this shows is not only that the Aboriginals have been here longer than current theory says, but also that, like megalithic builders all around the planet, they had wisdom and knowledge that we're barely beginning to understand now.
So we're just moving through. It's actually, the hill is shaped like a boomerang, and it's 300 meters long, so it's quite a substantial sized hill. So I want to come back to this beautiful timeline and just show you a little bit more about it now, because well, for a start, it was taken from Iceland ice cores, and the measurements were taken in -centigrade. So just looking up at the top there, from the very top of the graph. So we're talking about worrying about climate change, but when you look what it was like a little while ago, it doesn't look like we have much to worry about. So we've been pretty warm for quite a while. They even called that period about 500 years ago the medieval warm period. and it just bobs along, and then suddenly it crashes down at 11,600 years ago. And so, and then it went up again. So that's called the Younger Dryas period. And we really wonder, you know, what caused that? Yes, this is also quite good, just because this is a graph of 100,000 years.
More, 400,000.
Oh, 400,000, sorry. So then you can really see what a roller coaster little planet Earth's climate is on this.
And the small red peaks, that's the times in between ice ages.
Bit cold for me, anyway.
The Younger Dryas is actually named after a flower. It's a strange name, but this flower is called a Dryas. So the Younger Dryas is the latest period where that flower flourished.
So they have this theory that actually it's Graham Hancock is the one that's suggesting, from various other research, that a comet hit in sort of southwest Canada, northwest the States there, where the sea is, and that either it had a huge impact that went across. Maybe it broke up into many little pieces, and it had this impact all the way across the States and the Atlantic, and actually into the area of the Mediterranean, where you can still find some of the glass you're going to talk about in Egypt.
This here is called melt glass, and glass like that is found throughout the comet impact zone. And this layer here is called the black mat, and it's also found throughout the comet impact zone, and it has nanodiamonds and carbon spherules and all sorts of unusual things in it, high levels of iridium. However, there are alternative theories about what caused the Younger Dryas, and Robert Schoch, in his latest book called Forgotten Civilizations, believes that it was caused by solar activity, not a comet impact. But whatever caused the Younger Dryas period, it was a critically important time in the history of humanity. We went through so much so quickly there, with changes in the climate and sea level rise, and perhaps the destruction of the last cycle of civilization.
So here's just an animation that starts 20,000 years ago, and you can just see now how the ocean is coming in. We don't really know the time scale in which this happened. Robert Schoch suggests that the oceans could have come up really quickly in a matter of months or weeks, but this particular animation is making it nice and slow and steady and giving humanity lots of time to move house. But we don't really know how long it took.
So the new story, which has been evolving, which most of these researchers would agree with, has certain threads they fully agree on, and then the details get a bit vaguer. But clearly, the previous cycle of civilization was destroyed during this time of the great flooding, during the end of the Younger Dryas, as the sea levels came up 125 meters.
And there's at least 300 cultures around the world. Graham Hancock says thousands, so maybe he's researched it more than me, that have flood myths. It's in Wales, it's in Greece, it's all over the planet. They have the talk about the flood.
So one of the greatest legacies of this civilization, whether they built them before the destruction or whether the survivors built them afterwards, is of course the many pyramids around the world. So we're going to have a quick look at them, starting again with Gunung Padang, which is a unique pyramid in some ways. Oops, there we go. A unique pyramid in some ways, but it's definitely part of the global phenomena of pyramid building, as are the pyramids of South America, Bosnia, China, Sudan, Nigeria, Greece, Tenerife in Spain. And they're all remarkably varied in their specifics, but they share common features such as their four-sidedness, obviously.
In internal chambers?
They mostly have internal chambers, underground tunnels, and aquifers associated with them.
So Gunung Padang is surrounded by aquifers and rivers, as we saw, and it seems to be important because it seems like that's part of how they generated energy from
the flow of the water beneath the pyramid can be used to generate electrical currents and so on, as Christopher Dunn has written many books about the Great Pyramid technology on that level.
Okay, and here we just have a few other pyramids that are stepped. I only put these in because they're stepped pyramids. So the Saqqara is the main one here at the bottom, which is in Egypt. But the top, that last top left one was in Tenerife, and the one on the right is actually a Korean grave, which is in northeast China. So, you know, step pyramids, again, happening part of this global civilization all over the world. And then, of course, the wonderful Teotihuacan in Mexico, which is probably the largest of all the step pyramids.
Most of the Mayan pyramids seem to be stepped pyramids as well.
Yeah. And interesting what Duncan said about the huge, the great civilizations. They've just discovered a whole huge city there called El Mirador, which housed hundreds and hundreds, thousands of people. This is interesting because this is Chichen Itza in Mexico, and we're just going to blend it. This is one that has the serpent with the main Pasaki temple in Bali. Now, if you look at the top of the temple here, it's got the alang-alang, the straw roofs with the wooden buildings on top, and just go back again slightly. So you can just imagine that probably Chichen Itza also had ceremonial places on top of it once upon a time. I mean, how similar is that? It's really, it's too much to be coincidence when they're across the other side of the planet from each other. Okay. Yeah.
So these 4 pyramids are in Java and Sumatra. Perhaps some of these are also relics of the pre-flood culture, or maybe they're built over the top of the pre-flood culture.
The one on the top left was on the Nexus cover, last issue before the issue before last, and that's in Central Java, as is the next one on the right. The one bottom left is at least 9,000 years old, and the one bottom right is in Sumatra.
And last but not least, this is Indonesia's most famous tourist attraction, Borobudur, which is also a stepped pyramid, and like Gunung Padang, it's also built over the top of a natural hill and built of andesite blocks. However, this structure was built much later in the Buddhist period, around 750 AD.
But why we included this is because another similarity between all the different civilizations is they seem to have been aware of the precession of the equinoxes. And that's a cycle that you don't notice easily because it only moves 1 degree every 71 years. So a full cycle to go all the way around is 26,120 years. So, you know, even if you're lying under the stars for your whole life, you don't necessarily notice that. And yet, Borobudur was made to align perfectly with that, so that when you go there and you're walking around looking at the history of Buddha, so it's quite recent in that sense, but you have to walk around 10 times and you have to pass 26,120 Buddhas to get to the top. So, you know, and we all know how the Mayan, because we were all built up to this, you know, 2012 Mayan calendar story. So, you know, it was all over the planet again, this awareness of precession.
So our culture's main name for the previous civilization in modern culture would have to be Atlantis. So let's have a quick look at our myth of Atlantis. This is an artist's interpretation showing the 3-ringed city, but all our stories of Atlantis come from Plato in the Timaeus and Critias. However, Danny, who we've been talking about a lot, Danny Hillman Natawajaya, has written his own book called Plato Didn't Lie, Atlantis is in Indonesia. He wasn't the first to write that. There was a Brazilian Professor Santos who also wrote a book about it. And more recently, Dani Irawanto has written a wonderful collection of information about this called Atlantis, the Lost City is in the Java Sea. And when I first encountered this, I went, but hang on, isn't Atlantis meant to be in the Atlantic Ocean? And the answer to that is the Greeks did not have a word for the Pacific Ocean or the Indian Ocean. Atlantic meant outside the Mediterranean Sea in the great world ocean, which it is.
So what Plato said in his book, he spoke about there being fiery mountains, we presume were volcanoes, and also about a sweet nut, with a white center that you could drink. Well, it sounds like coconuts, and you don't really get coconuts in the middle of the Atlantic.
And of course, Plato's date for the sinking of Atlantis is calculated at 11,600 years ago, which fits totally perfectly with the end of the Younger Dryas. This is a chart showing a correlation of different locations and Plato's requirements for them.
So we'd like to suggest that Atlantis wasn't actually one particular location, but that it was a global civilization that had many centers in many different places around the planet, and hence how we have the similarity in these megalithic structures.
So in 2015, an important debate was scheduled between Zahi Hawass, who was the head of the Egyptian antiquities for 10 or 15 years, and Graham Hancock, who we've met a couple of times. And Graham brought up the subject of Göbekli Tepe because it's been dated at 12,600 years ago. And that might mean that there were megalithic cultures active at that time, and maybe we should look again at the dating of the Sphinx, which the establishment says is no more than 5,000 years old. So we're going to play you 1 minute of a discussion between Graham and Zahi to show you the old school and the new school, and how Zahi Hawass shows that not only is he not interested in Göbekli Tepe, but he hasn't actually heard of it. Sorry.
The argument about the Sphinx made by Dr. Mark Lehman some years ago was that the Sphinx couldn't possibly be 12,000 years old because there was no other site, no other megalithic site anywhere in the world which was anywhere in the range of 12,000 years old. When we have a major discovery conducted by a respected archaeological institute in Turkey of a major megalithic site which is 11,600 years old, I believe it vitiates that argument against an absence of context for the Sphinx, which is also a megalithic monument.
I don't think that what Rashid said is right. It has nothing to do with anything. In my opinion, we know the date of the Sphinx. What has been found in Turkey, I don't think, and I don't know if this is true or not. I have the geographical.
So there you have it. The river of denial runs through Egypt. The river of denial does not stop in Egypt. It flows through the whole of modern Western society. The whole establishment is in denial of anything that threatens the current worldview that their careers are built on, and anything that threatens the idea of our superiority that gives us the right to exploit the world's resources and oppress people who are less powerful than ourselves. So of course it's not just the Sphinx that's controversial. Here's a list of other phenomena that are found all around the world. All of these subjects are written about in Nexus magazine. All of them are spoken about by our archaeological heroes. All of these phenomena are found in multiple continents around the world, and they all represent significant evidence that the old story is full of holes and support the new story that there was a previous global civilization.
Astrological knowledge, awareness of the precession of the equinoxes, giants, elongated skulls, crystal skulls, Pleiades and Orion, flood stories, underground tunnels, the list goes on.
And stone circles, massive stone spheres. Actually, I forgot to put pyramids in there because there were so many other pieces of evidence.
So imagine if the world suddenly woke up tomorrow and it was like, oh, actually there was a global civilization much more clever than you guys previously, and they had all sorts of technology and it was free. So that would be good. And the pyramids were built by, an Atlantean civilization, and before that there were other previous civilizations. Yeah, go on. Would it be business as usual?
Well, I think
Perhaps.
that it might be, but so many of the world's current crises are empowered by that old story that if the new story was to become known widely, it might be a major step towards freeing humanity from the hierarchical control system. Because until we understand the past, how can we understand the present or create a better future? Before we left Gunung Padang,
4 minutes left. Narada gave one of his, we gave a presentation to Danny and all his friends about the other things we do, and Narada gave him one of his sacred geometry pieces which he loved, and said that when he joined two together it looked like a vimana, a flying object, and we've got those on our stall if anyone's interested in looking at them.
So coming back to our flying machine, we'll take off from Gunung Padang and leave it to its sunset.
Okay, and so that brings us to the end of a wonderful day in Gunung Padang and also toward the end of our presentation. So we ask, will the mysteries of this underground chamber ever be revealed? Will we have to wait for the old school of academics to retire before we can actually access its secrets? And hopefully the transformation will be quick enough to avoid us destroying ourselves totally with all this outmoded and sort of limited belief system that we seem to have, our governments and our academics seem to have. So only time will tell. Maybe those of us here in the room or those of us that love Nexus will be able to help this transition.
My feeling as I walked around Gunung Padang is that we may never know who built this place or why they built it or when they built it. And perhaps that is as it should be, because until humanity is ready to let go of the old story that is destroying us, we'll simply continue to be in denial of the truth anyway. The new technologies we developed over the last century have allowed us to see into the microcosmic world, to measure the size of the universe, and to peek beneath the sands of time to catch a glimpse of our ancient past. Is it coincidence that at this time when we're facing all these disasters, we also are on the brink of discoveries that will give us things like control of gravity and access to free energy? And we're also discovering that our ancient ancestors may have had similar abilities. Is it coincidence that these memories are beginning to be accessed now by our global culture, our amnesiac society? Or is it all this part of the unfolding of Gaia's dream? Morpheus said in The Matrix, "I do not see coincidence, I see purpose." I believe that it is our fate to be here, to help humanity choose whether to be part of the old story of competition and scarcity and separation, or to be part of the new story of cooperation and abundance. That's what we're here for.
Thank
you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.